So, today, the first question up for grabs here comes to us from Seth T, who writes, "You guys are the best, and please continue the great work." Thank you so much, Seth. All right. What if Mr. Kevin Feige's destiny was different, and he was in charge of Warner Brothers / DC instead of Marvel? What would the outcome be? Would we be seeing phases 1, 2, and 3 of the DC cinematic universe, or would it all be as it is now? Is the DC universe that much more difficult to portray in live-action form? Maybe Feige should clone himself. Well, thanks a lot for the email, Seth. A lot of people, and I've talked about this several times on the show as I take another sip from our sponsor. We've talked several times on the show about Kevin Feige. For those of you who don't know who Kevin Feige is, he's the mastermind. He is the godfather. He is the architect of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's the president of production at Marvel Studios. Now, a lot of times, very erroneously, a lot of us will say, well, Joss Whedon has crafted this great Marvel Cinematic Universe. Joss Whedon hasn't done squat. He wrote and directed the greatest comic book film of all time in The Avengers. But the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not a creation of Joss Whedon. It's a creation very carefully guided by this hyper genius, Kevin Feige. He's the one who has architected this entire thing, and the dude's a genius. So Seth is asking the question, okay, now what if he had been in charge of DC instead of Marvel? Obviously, everything would be much better at DC. And I think what happens sometimes is that we romanticize the what if. Like often we take a scenario, we propose a what if, and then we over-romanticize what the what if would have been. So for instance, in this situation, we say, oh, what if Kevin Feige had been in charge of DC? Imagine how awesome the DC cinematic universe would be by now, and blah, 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 blah. It's easy to over-romanticize things like that. But here's part of the reality. I believe that if Kevin Feige had been in charge of DC Warner Brothers, do I think we would have had a DC cinematic universe by now, maybe already in phase 2? Maybe. But remember, there's going to be a trade-off to that. And the trade-off to that would be this. We would never have had the Christopher Nolan Batman films. We wouldn't have had them. Because Feige would have wanted to incorporate the Christopher Nolan Batman into a larger cinematic universe. Whereas Christopher Nolan has been very staunch, steadfast, and stubborn, rightly so, that he wanted his Batman to exist in a world without other superheroes. That he wanted his Batman in a world without magic, without aliens, without superpowers, without the supernatural. Because his Batman, the Christopher Nolan Batman, in a quote-unquote real world, was a god among men. And I remember this one great interview he gave that to introduce the Flash into that Batman's world, to introduce Wonder Woman into that Batman's world, to introduce Superman, the Green Lantern, Hawkman, or whoever else, Martian Manhunter, into that world would be diminutive to Batman. Suddenly, he's not the god among men. Now, remember, that's how he believes it would have translated onto a real-world live-action screen. Obviously, in the comic books, it works very well. But just because it works in a comic book doesn't mean it's going to work in a live-action film. We've talked about that several times. So, would it have been different if Kevin Feige had been in charge of DC? Yes. Would it have been better? I don't know. Because I believe it would have meant we never would have had the Christopher Nolan Batman films. Now, while I'm not a huge fan of the final film, The Dark Knight Rises. I'm not a big fan of that movie. I, like everybody else, absolutely loved and adored Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Those are great films. And overall, I think it's a really great trilogy. So, if I could be a Time Lord and change the fabric of time and space and reality and make it so that 15 years ago, Kevin Feige took over DC and the Warner Brothers Cinematic Universe, I don't know that I would have made it happen. Even though we would have gotten some really cool stuff, I don't think I would have taken the trade-off of losing the Christopher Nolan Batman films. And I believe now DC and Warner Brothers is heading in the right direction anyway. I thought Man of Steel was the best movie of the year. I know a lot of people don't agree with me. That's cool. That's one of the most fun things about being film fans. We get to disagree. That's cool. But I'm just saying, for me, I thought Man of Steel was the best film of the year. I love the casting of Ben Affleck as Batman. I love that they're doing a Batman versus Superman. I think things are going in the right direction. So maybe we'll get there even without Kevin Feige. We just might have got there a little bit faster with him.
If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to AMC Movie News on YouTube. It's free and a great way to stay updated with all the latest movie news and check out our daily show, AMC Movie Talk. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Twitter to stay in the loop for our special prizes, giveaways, and contests.